Welcome to LOA Today. I'm Walt Thiessen. I've been doing this podcast since September of 2012, and boy, are my lips tired. This is your daily dose of happy. We are so happy you decided to join us today. I can't do this little thing that I normally do with Anne-Marie because she's not able to make it today, but I'd be telling her, she'd be telling me, hey, you changed your background, because I used to have a background that was all black sky with the stars. And then I said, this podcast over the years has evolved to the point now where we talk about everything and anything, and my views and understanding about how the universe works and so forth has also evolved. So now it used to be, I would think, like you have human life forms, you have animal life forms, maybe some plant life forms. Now I think of the entire universe as being alive. So why not have living color universe in the background instead of this dark black thing with little tiny specks of light? So yeah, I've changed the background. And, so even though I don't have a co-host who is kind of making comments about that, you'll get that in the next few episodes. Just, be ready for that one. But in the meantime, I have a Joyce. Yes, I have a Joyce. I have a guest joining me today. Her name is Denise Miceli, and she's a coach in subconscious healing. Now that term, subconscious healing, it's going to evoke a number of different emotions and thought patterns in a lot of different people, because I think we all kind of realize that anytime that we have blocks or resistances or whatever, we're the ones who created them. We're the ones who set them up in the first place. At least those of us who've been studying this stuff for a while, we know that. Those of us who haven't been, we're happy to blame other people. But for those of us who've been dealing with it, well, okay, yeah, I guess it's me. Yeah. Oof. But sometimes we need help with that stuff, and that's what Denise does. So Denise, first of all, welcome to the program. How you doing?
Great. Thank you so much.
And second of all, thank you for helping people to remove those blocks, because they can be nasty and they can get in the way and really ruin things in your life. But how did you go about starting doing that? I mean, what got you going in that in the first place?
Well, I was working in the coaching space, but working more on nutrition and fitness, and really started to notice a difference. And it really was right around the pandemic, where people would show up. They would be excited to get started, and some were working on both things. Some were just working on nutrition, but I'll just use the nutrition example. We'd go through their macros. I'd help them create a plan. We'd, focus on the big wins. And so they had this big hour call with me. And the next week they started showing up, and they were like, I don't know what's wrong with me. I can't get started. Like some didn't even shop for the different foods. Some were like, I didn't do anything. Some bought the foods and didn't cook anything. So it was just various states of just feeling completely blocked in moving forward. And so obviously with everything that was happening in the world, and people were, getting sick, and relatives, all of these things and all the unknowns that we were living with during that time, I was like, I feel like I need something deeper. I need to help people to understand where these blocks are. And even though I work with men and women, I started to notice that women in particular were having like old feelings and emotions that would come up when it was like, okay, I'm going to take time to prepare some food that maybe the rest of my family isn't going to eat, or I'm going to take time to do, these workouts, and I have to wake up earlier, just in some way claiming time for themselves, and realizing that there was a lot of emotion coming up around doing that. There was a lot of emotion coming up around, increasing self-care. If you want to just get down to the basics, whatever the case was that they were trying to get started on. And I actually had a mom, with a young child, and after, talking to her a little bit about subconscious healing, because I had found it for myself personally, and I was practicing it. And she started I was telling her, sometimes there's deeper things that come up, and, offered would you like to try a session of this? I'm in training for it now. And within 1 or 2 sessions, she just confessed to me. She said, I can't stand my son. He's a little monster right now. And this is what, my husband and I are arguing over this behavior and that behavior and that. But it was like she was so overwhelmed with emotion from that situation that was going through a rough period with his behavior and the consistency between the two of them. And it was their first child. So, that's a lot to unpack. And so
Sure.
she just was like, just even admitting that though, and I was a K-12 educator. So as a K-12 educator and leader, I had parents come to me like, help me with this kid, so I totally understand that emotion, and I have one myself. So I was just like, okay, let's really dig into what's going on here. And she agreed to do these sessions with me. I had to do a certain number to get certified. And she was, finding that she did have guilt around taking this time for herself. But the other thing was there was this unreasonable demand by her son that like whatever she was doing, if he needed her, like she was expected to drop everything. And there we go, people pleasing, right? One of the behaviors that becomes automatic for women when, we feel like we've got to take care of everyone first. And so that's kind of how I got into it, and then decided that it was so powerful that I really wanted to phase out of helping people specifically with nutrition and fitness, even though it's still a passion of mine. And sometimes people come to me and that's the problem. They're like, why can't I do this? Okay. And a lot of times it comes out to be, they have people pleasing behaviors around food. They end up giving in to the rest of the family on certain foods that they're trying to eliminate or reduce. And so I've seen that, it can become an issue, but by opening it up to being a subconscious healer, it allows us to get to what is the root of the patterns that you have from your past that are so deeply like, it's a well-worn path. So as soon as difficulty comes up, it's like, oh, that groove is well-worn. I'm going towards that. And especially when it comes to people pleasing, you find that women will often be so embedded in people pleasing, they have no boundaries, and their resentment is growing of everything around them. But the problem is they haven't even said what they need. So it's kind of a vicious cycle, and they can really push people away in their lives if they don't get to the heart of it that, sometimes we are raised, a lot of the older generations are raised, there were no boundaries. There was no such thing as boundaries in our families. It was like, do what you're told or be seen and not heard and all of this kind of stuff. So it's a whole process to kind of unpack this subconsciously, see where it came from without going deeply into telling every detail of the story, but bringing up the most powerful emotion that seems to be stuck on a loop.
Yeah, I get that. And by the way, I think it's younger generations too. I think this is not something that has gone away just because we moved on a few decades. I think it's still pretty prevalent.
No, it's true. It's true. I think there were just maybe different beliefs that I see a pattern with my older clients that were more prevalent during that time. And now there's new ones, with young parents and so forth, having young parents come into me as a school administrator, and they literally were like asking for advice on how to be parents. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, oh my, we have these parenting workshops and that, but they really did not, just like us, like we didn't really get taught how to be good parents. So our parents, however, God bless, however they were, that's what we got. And we accepted it and so forth. And so, a lot of times people end up, asking for help on just the basics and finding out, these kindergartners and first graders are kind of making the rules. And, this is why they're tired when they come to school, because they're going to sleep with an iPad, and they're not really getting enough sleep and things like that. So it's, it's very helpful to have a process where you find what emotion that person is stuck with. And a lot of times I would say that everyone is on a continuum, and there is sadness where we just keep asking, why did this happen to me? Why do I always have this pattern? Or we have anxiety, so that was sadness about the past and anxiety about worrying about the future, procrastinating about the future. Oh, I have to have everything perfect before I move forward. And so there is this anxious or sad thing. And when we start getting more intense in those feelings, it's a sign that there is something deeper that is asking you to take a look at it and to understand, where did it start? How does it feel to, do you want to keep that pattern going, or do you want to see if you can calm it down. It's always going to be a part of you, your history and your past, right? People say, oh, you shouldn't feel that emotion, but we've got to feel it. We've got to understand it a little bit, and then we can try to reduce the intensity of it. And I like to talk a little bit about triggering, because triggering wasn't even a thing. I mean, it was clinically more of a thing, 5-10 years ago. But now everything's got a trigger label, right? Commercials and movies and books and videos and all of that. And I say that with triggering, that too is a sign. If something external is triggering you to the point where you have a flare up of emotions, intense, anger or overreactivity, that's a sign that there is work to do, and that people should, instead of what we normally see people do when they're triggered, is they get angry and they go external with that anger, with that reaction. They are looking to blame. And I say, go inward and say to yourself, why am I reacting in this way to this situation? What is it about this? And that's where you can bring up a memory might come up, and a certain emotion that you're like, why? This emotion definitely is related, but this situation, it shouldn't be this intense. So clearly it's got some activation to it from another event. And so it's very easy to bring that up. So I think triggering is actually an opportunity if we have the desire for personal growth and more happiness in life. So
there's a fine line too, isn't there, where triggering is concerned, because we typically associate triggering with some sort of external event or some other person doing something or saying something or whatever. But we're quite capable of triggering ourselves. It can be internal as well. It doesn't have to be from outside.
Absolutely, right? Just being in certain situations that may remind us of something in the past. I had this whole awakening with subconscious healing where I realized that I really saw myself as different from a very young age. And I didn't feel like I fit into my family dynamic. But that was all me defining that. And through doing this work, I did have specific memories that came up, but it was all my perception at that time. And you know what? I am different, and I like that I'm different. But we can take something that we saw or felt, and we can almost traumatize ourselves with it. And that's why I tell people, it doesn't have to be that you need to have trauma to do this kind of work, but it can just be a memory, and it doesn't even have to be accurate. It really doesn't matter. It's just what you feel. And so after doing this work for a couple of years now, I recently was at a family reunion, and I was quiet because I felt like, wow, so many things that I had preconceived and that I had thought in my younger years, I was just like, wow, that's all in your head. A lot of it was your perceptions, your dramatization. And yes, I'm Italian and Greek, so we have a lot going on with drama and food and, all of that kind of stuff. But when you start to step back from it, your perception shifts and you're able to go back into it. And it was absolutely, things that certain family members would say and whatnot. I was smiling. I was just like, yeah, I don't need to interact with that. That's who he is and so forth. But, and of course, it's family. So there's going to be things you don't agree on, but it was so delightful to see the value of this kind of work, because if we don't do that work, we can find ourselves separating ourselves from everyone. And that's really what I think, COVID presented to us as human beings was like, okay, we're going to sift and sort you all, and you're all going in your little units and figure your stuff out, and I do believe there are still people, especially transitional ages, where you go through these okay, my roles are changing. Maybe I'm retiring now. Maybe I'm, losing a partner or whatever. And so you start to look at yourself and you're like, okay, I'm not the same person anymore. What do I want to keep? What do I want to allow myself to explore? And it is a time where you can really kind of say, oh, well, you know what? I'm kind of used to being at home now. Let me just stay home. And it is the easy, I say to people, it's the easy way out. It's your comfort zone. But is that what you want for the rest of your life?
That's the
Probably
question.
not, and that is the question.
Well, I wonder what your take is on this, because one of the observations that I have made, particularly in the last few years, particularly when I meet people who are new to me for the first time, not so much here on the show, but out in the real world.
Out in the world.
But when I'm meeting people, one of my perceptions is that people actually like picking and staying with those comfort zones. They may be uncomfortable. It may not be pleasant, but I mean, even just the idea of associating comfort zone with, what's going on in their life that they don't like, that alone is something they don't even want to look at. So
it is true.
And there's that that's that loop, right? That's the loop that you can't get yourself out of, because all of a sudden you're feeding it.
That is the loop. And I do feel like there is a lot of fear under that, fear of being different, fear of stepping out. And then because the world is very volatile right now, and it's clear that we're going through very transformational times, governments, societies, there's, I say, like, people are separating themselves so far to either end that they're going to come around and meet back in the middle again. And, I just feel like
truth, I think, actually,
it's, I really do see that, because from a very young age, I was very interested in history and politics and that. And I have a friend who's a historian, and I was laughing. We reconnected recently, and I was just like, I think you're one of the reasons that I love history, because it really is very informative to where we are now and the cycles that we go through as people, as human beings, and as different cultures. And I think that's the problem, is that people don't want to know that. They're just like, nope, it's just right now. And, it's very myopic to just be, mired in what is. And so I do feel like it is so true. But I think, that what your point being that, people they don't even want to call it their comfort zone. They're just as like, this is what I need, and this is what I'm about. And I say, if you're happy, great. I mean, there's so many people now moving to other countries, and I've been connecting with people like that. I'm considering it myself, because I haven't traveled a lot in my life. And I'm like, ooh, these people are just traveling. Sounds like a good plan to me,
Yeah, right.
And so looking at that, and I'm seeing that, people are able to have adventure and fun when they let go of this comfort, when they let go of, like, okay, I've got my, my beautiful oak roll top desk that's an antique, and all of these things that I've just been so attached to and that I love. But I'm like, what if I could explore different cities? What if I could, obviously being an entrepreneur, I would still have to travel with, some stuff that I would be working with, but I see these people who are doing it. And I think that is really the key, is that what we're missing right now is people connecting with other people to see what's possible. And that's part of why I created this as a small group coaching, because I was doing primarily coaching of people one-to-one. And I really kind of miss the environment of what you gain being in a group when you're learning. And I was a teacher, and I wasn't a classroom teacher for very long, because I was very into experiential learning. And the administrators were like, we want you to show the other teachers this. Like, they saw the power of, like, doing projects, doing integrated things. And of course, the old school teachers were like, you're doing what? They were like, no, we just want to stand up and write on the board and just preach. And so that became my thing of, like, challenging people to make learning interactive. And when you do that, your engagement goes way up. So what are you doing in your life to engage with life, to engage with all these new possibilities? It was never a thing to think about living in another country. But now look at all the people that are just moving around the globe, and even just this experience. Like, I started doing podcast guesting, back in June, and honestly, from the very first guest experience, I felt the power of co-creation. I felt the power of meeting people from all different countries, all over the world, who are totally interested in subconscious healing. And it just made me feel like, you know what, this was more empowerment to the idea that we are actually getting closer together across country borders in a lot of ways. And the way that we collaborate and meet people, like Zoom. Remember when Zoom was like, okay, everybody's got to learn how to use Zoom. Now it's just like a natural thing for people to do it. And now it's almost like I have Zoom burnout. I need to actually be around real people. And a lot of folks in my field, in the coaching field, are like, you know what? I want to get out and do actual live speaking engagements. And I'm like, yes, we need to challenge ourselves again, even in that. Like, I love doing these interviews. In fact, after the first 2 interviews, I decided I wanted to write a book about this because I have my own way. I got certified in a particular kind of subconscious healing, but I have my own way of blending what my experiences are, particularly as a woman and as an older woman and as somebody who is not willing to look at aging in a certain way. And so I feel that I feel that we as Americans especially view aging as degradation. And I honestly don't believe that it has to be that way. It's a mindset.
I mentally, there are a few things that I'm in favor of resisting. That's one of them. I don't want that. I don't want that part of my thought process at all.
No. And it's, it's so I do find that I still attract women who are saying, you know what, I had a hip replacement, but I don't want to give in to not being active and all of that. But if you listen to a lot of, I would say old school or just old fashioned sort of doctors and therapists and that, like I had someone tell me in my 40s that, oh, you can't do anything to put pressure on your spine. And so for about a couple of weeks, I did the Stairmaster at the gym and I thought, I'm going to blow my brains out. Like, this is so boring. And I stopped listening to that and I challenged it and, became a personal trainer. And I do all kind, I was going to people's homes when I was living in LA and challenging all types of different bodies to do different things. And it is all possible, but it's a mindset that is really broken. And so part of what I do in this course is that we obviously want to move people from low emotions and go up the ladder and not expect them to go from like depression to, exhilaration, but help them move along that and discover each session, each week, like what is the most pressing emotion, and then find, if you can, discover the root to it. If not, let your subconscious mind just let yourself go and allow it to heal, to let the intensity of that go so you can create what you want to create. And people are just amazed that when you're able to make that space, the things that come up, even just, it might not come up during the session, but it can come up in a dream later. I have one client who working in the financial field forever and just grinding it out and constantly working and working weekends and, doing quite well, but just feeling so depleted. And after working together, she was like, I've started to see that I really hate this work. And I'm a little panicked because like I have this level of income and I don't want to give up this lifestyle and all that. And so a couple of months of, doing sessions with her and whatnot. And a few months after we weren't working together anymore, she reached out and said to me, I woke up and I just decided I wanted to work in the nonprofit industry and that I could use my financial expertise, but to help causes that are important to me. And she said, I decided that. And within a few weeks, it was in my lap, this opportunity. And I got this position and I love it. And and she just was under such constant pressure, tax season, this season, that. And she's like, it's wonderful work. It's a great organization. And the pay is decent, and so you start to see what's possible. And it's just like law of attraction. If you're thinking, oh, I'm going to drudge my way into work, and, it's that forcing of like, okay, I know that I need to do this right now, but it's hard to get inspired under that energy. But when you start to allow the space and allow the intensity of it to calm down, that's when you get the space to allow something new to come in, to allow, even just the positive emotion of what would feel good. And I've had other clients that same thing where they just like maybe always had a hobby of painting or something like that. And they start to realize, I don't do that anymore. And they can make space to just, dig out and see if the paint's all dried out. They need to get some new paint. And they start to do that. And they go, oh my gosh, I'm so inspired by just taking this couple of hours on a Saturday to paint again. And I think that I want to pursue this like in a more serious way. And so those things aren't going to happen though if we're drilling away at this like goal oriented, that for a while stoicism made a comeback, right? We got to just keep working hard. And it's like, no, actually that can kill you. I mean, the stress of it, the physical and mental stress of it, and just, drilling that even into kids that, athletes and all of that. It's like, this is why I think they end up sometimes with substance abuse problems, because they're just literally, there's no let up on them. So, so it's very exciting to, have a new tool like this to where people can see immediate relief from these intense, like sort of repeating emotional patterns, and then just see just a little bit of relief from that. And all of this stuff that's been sort of pushed down in their, in their heart and their soul is allowed to, bubble up to the top. And so that's why I love doing it.
I think one of the themes that I explored early on in my own travels along this general path of enlightenment, as they call it. I hate that term.
I know.
I'm not a freaking light bulb. No. But it was one of the earliest things I recognized was I got to figure out what it is I like. And that's a challenge. Not only is that a challenge to come up with what it is that you like, but it can actually be a threat to your current existing life. And that I think that's probably the biggest part of it. It's the part that kind of gets the least amount of attention.
Yeah.
But it's just so easy. I mean, if you're in your family, you have certain ways, certain things that you do, certain thought patterns, certain practices. And if you start exploring ideas that are outside of that's a threat, or it can be perceived as a threat anyway. And of course, that's what keeps us from wanting to explore it anymore. So we don't explore it. And so we get stuck on, of all things, I don't really know what I want to do.
Yes. And it can happen any time in life. It used to be, in the olden days, it used to be that people did things for 20, 30 years and they were done and they retired and that was the end of the story. But, now, I mean, even just as a young person, I wanted to go to college early because I was bored in school. Like my parents sent me to a Catholic school. I was always ahead and we got to choose. Do we want to go to the Catholic all girls high school? Do we want to go to public school? I was like, send me to public school. Like I'm tired of all this stuff, just wasn't that into the whole, religious part of it. And then I got there and I realized I'm like a year or more ahead of the rest of the kids. And so, but it was something that my family was just like, why do you want to do that? Like they just didn't understand. So in some ways, I've always kind of been this pioneer that was like challenging the norm. I don't know where that really comes from generationally, but so I did that at a very young age. And I remember my guidance counselor said, some of my friends were doing this, like they were going to early admissions to college. And I was like, ooh, early admissions. Ooh. So I went to my counselor and I said, I want to do this. And I'm just kind of like done with a lot of the requirements. And she said, Denise, you're not a shoo-in for this program. Oh. And I was like, So that became like a thing for me. It was like, don't tell me what I can't do, And I think that even made me more resilient and stronger. So I applied to 4 colleges and I got in 3. And I was like, look, I was bringing them into her, like showing her, but I think,
I've often wondered, I mean,
yeah.
I don't know what it's like today, but I'm going to go back to when I was in school. You mentioned guidance counselors, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
I wonder if anybody's ever tracked what the track record was of guidance counselors in, say, the 70s and 80s. Because I'm willing to bet that their batting average was worse than most minor league players. I mean,
Oh,
really, yeah. I think they got it wrong a whole lot more often than they got it right.
Yep.
And I've never quite figured out why. I mean, all you have to do is just kind of do the opposite of what you want to do, and you're brilliant. Why would this? I don't. Have you figured out why there's so much resistance to that? Because you were kind of in that field for a bit.
I was in that, and to be honest, by the time that I got into it as a professional, what I saw was the overloading of the job. That these people literally had no time to sit down, look at a kid, look at their transcript, and actually ask them what they wanted. They were overloaded with testing. They were overloaded with paperwork the other administrators would put on them, to the point where they really could, if they were making appointments with kids, and I experienced this with my own daughter, who's 29 now, so it was, back there, and they were literally only giving 5-minute appointments to kids about their future.
Yeah, I remember that.
Because why? Yeah. They didn't have any more time because of what was being put on them. So I'm sure it's some version of that. But to be honest, I did feel like, there were certain kids that were getting a little bit more encouragement than others. And with me, my family, I was the only one in my family going to the public school. They didn't really know my family. So I felt like it was just kind of like, you think you're, and some of my other friends that were doing these things, like they had more well-off parents, probably parents that maybe were more involved. And so I think that there was some level of just like, who do you think you are? I remember, in fact, that she told me that if I could get my mom to write a letter saying that I'd always been an A-B student, this was her requirement to support me in this effort. And so I literally, my mom said, write the letter and I'll sign it.
That is just unbelievable.
So I did. And so she signed off on it. And then, like the only school I didn't get in was Ivy League because I just wasn't that great at math. And I just thought, that I could have listened to her. And I think that's, because I believe the subconscious mind in the human condition has a negativity bias. It's going to go back to the negativity first. And so having those different challenges where I felt a little different, I felt like I wanted to challenge the status quo. I was very aware because of friends and things that I was interested in politics and history and so forth. I was taking college classes in 11th grade, and I just felt like, no, I'm going to challenge that. I'm going to question that. I had a very strong sense of logical thinking, and it was not really that important in my family. So we'd have these grand arguments because I would like, no, that doesn't make any sense. And they were thinking more emotion based, and I was thinking more logic based. And so, so I guess that led me to always like seeking, finding answers, finding a way, finding that resilience, and probably why I became a teacher eventually, because I felt like there were teachers that I had in high school that would look at me and say, your writing is like such and such author, and you should really pursue this. Or your reading of that, like I studied languages, and they were just like, you're like a natural. I had been taking Spanish for a long time, and I decided to try French. And it just came out of me. Like I just had French is a little difficult if you've never spoken it. And, so I remember those teachers, and I thought, what did that really cost them to say something positive to a student who hadn't really been hearing that being in a Catholic school? It was all about what you did wrong. It was all enforcing the negativity bias, right? And feeling more timid, feeling more quiet in that environment. And so getting into the school. And like I said, I remember like writing teachers. I remember English teachers. I remember teachers who were like, even when I wanted to take AP chemistry, they were like, oh, your math's not that strong. I was like, I don't care. I'm going to take it. Like I learned that I had to persist and that they would relent, because
that's
they were
nice
like,
early lesson to learn too. Because it took me years to learn that one. I was glad when I finally did, but it was not natural to me. Let's put it that way.
No, and it wasn't natural to me, but perhaps the fact that I was kind of arguing for myself at home, that I felt like it kind of strengthened me to do it with other people. And like I said, it kind of made me like, okay, watch me. I'm going to do this, And so when I got to be an educator, I found myself very drawn to the at-risk population because I was like, they are probably not getting this encouragement. Maybe it's because their parents don't know how, their parents are struggling themselves, or they just didn't have good parenting themselves. And no one is to blame for that. But when we don't have that from 0 to 7, and this is what I learned, in subconscious healing, that when we don't have it at that time, we take on what we did have, which was a lot of times condition, you act this way and you will get rewarded. And so we would act that way because we wanted to feel the love, right? And so we would find ourselves changing who we were to kind of please the people around us. If we needed to be the helper, if we needed to be mom's helper, or if we, needed to be the rescuer or whatever, the particular situation was, then maybe you weren't doing your art or doing your writing because you were doing that first. So a lot of times when that gets blocked in us as a young person, it can just keep coming back to bite us if we don't do the work and say, oh, you know what? I've been doing this kind of denial of what I want for too long. And so you can find yourself in the job that's not aligned with you, or in the relationship that's basically mimicking those relationships where you took care of everyone else first, and you didn't put your mask on before you took care of everyone else, the old saying, that's been around for a while. But yeah, so that, those experiences made me go into these at-risk schools to find something, first of all, to care enough to get to know each child was like my first thing that I just loved about it. I would have stayed in the classroom forever, but I got divorced and I needed to earn more. And I was getting a lot of encouragement to become a leader because they saw that I had a different way and, that I could help improve, this old school style of, talking head in the front of the classroom. And so I, just, kind of a long story of my journey, but I found that's what I was teaching teachers when I became a school leader was like, do you know your kids? If you don't know who they are, you can't appeal to them in the way that matters. I'd have kids come to me 2-3 years behind, 4 years behind in reading level as an elementary teacher. And I would find out what they cared about. Because if it didn't in their orbit right at that moment, they weren't going to try.
Oh, sure.
They were already, they were already discouraged. They were already being told they were dumb. They were hearing it and feeling it in the body language if it wasn't said directly. And, finding what it was that was important. I had one boy who everyone loved him. He was adorable, but he was, of course, bigger because he was supposed to be in a later grade. And he came in and he was, reading at a kindergarten level. And so I found out that he loved mountain bikes. Anything to do with a mountain bike, he was beaming. And I lived in the high desert at that time. And so it was a big thing. And, so I made a deal with him and I was like, if you will go to the kindergarten and the pre-K and practice reading the Dr. Seuss books with them, then I will help you to read because I got a bunch of mountain bike magazines from parents and things, and I will help you to read these because he wanted to read them so badly. And he was adored by the little kids because he was very cute. And they just couldn't wait for him to come in. If he was absent, they were like, where's Rusty? And so, it's finding out who people are, what really matters to them. And it really, it comes full circle because that was a 20-year career that I had that I eventually had to say, it doesn't feel like what I'm supposed to do from now on. I thought I would stay in it like 30 years, but I just started to feel that it had kind of worn itself out in my life. And talk about getting into a place where you're like, oh, how do I leave this now? Like I've put all this time into it, education, I'm at a high level. I was working at the district level after a while with the worst performing schools and trying to help them make big decisions about how to get better. And I just found that my ideas in a bureaucratic system they weren't interested in them. They wanted to kind of just keep the status quo going. And I said, you know what? I'm ready for more. And I took the risk. I said, you know what? I always will have those degrees. I always will have those, certifications can always be renewed. And I said, I've got to do it. I started to be at the sad end of every day, in the morning, waking up sad, at night, going to sleep sad. And I said, you know what? I've got to take the risk because I can always go back. But if I stay stuck feeling this low emotion, I'm not really following my heart, following what my soul is calling me to do, which at that time I was like, I want to help people grow. I want to help people. I want to use what I know to help people grow in their personal lives. So it came all the way back around.
It's funny how that happens too. Things do come around in ways that we don't expect, and they often pop up at the least convenient times. They pop up when we don't really want to have to deal with stuff. All of a sudden it pops up. But the funny thing is that when it does pop up, it's usually because it's when it's most needed. That's probably why it popped up in that place in the first place. But I don't know, maybe the fact that it was inconvenient or unpleasant or not desired at that point kind of helped to fuel it. But whatever the reason is, whatever the explanation, it does pop up when it is most needed. That much I do know. And it plays out time and time again.
Yeah. And I think, it became like a lot of my friends really didn't understand. They were just like, but you have a house here and you have, because I sold my home, I moved away. And this was all before the pandemic. I was just so unhappy. I had lived in this place for 20 years. I had done all the things I could do. I had sort of hit a wall with promotions and that. And the next level for me was like assistant superintendent. And I was just like looking at people who were at that 25 and 30 year mark, and they were all just miserable. And I was like, this is where I'm heading. I just had like a panic moment, but I dug deeper and I was like, I'm ready to take a risk. I was going to walk away. And friends of mine said, but wait a minute, you still have 20 years. That counts for something. Go find out what you can do. And, again, just opening your mind to, okay, well, maybe I don't have to just walk away and quit. And I found out I could do like an early retirement. I was like, are you kidding me? Mm-hmm. I can actually have something that I can go forward and create something new. And I was like out the door because I said, you know what? That makes me feel like, I can still use all of the knowledge, all of it, because they really trained us in change management and working with small groups of people who, we would go in and challenge them. Like, you're the professionals in the building. Why are your kids all like failing? What's going on? And people would laugh. They would cry. They would walk out of the room and they would later come to me and say, I don't think I should be a teacher. And I'd be like, good for you. Like, we have to be open to change. And so somehow that spirit of just, that resiliency that I developed and that willingness to ask the tough questions, became a theme for me. And so I really have had the ability to look at things and say, let's challenge those fears. Let's challenge what is, the negative thing that keeps you stuck. And it isn't, like you said, not everybody is going to be willing to do it. But if you know that there's something that every time you do it, whether it's going to an art gallery, a theater show, or maybe it's going to a specific place like the ocean, or that it brings in such joy in you that you don't see anywhere else in your life, that is truly a sign that, you need to explore what is it you could do, because, life, as I'm sure is so short. And we're only in these bodies for a certain amount of time. And, so it is a choice to stay with what you're doing and just make the best of it. And there's nothing wrong with that if that is a better path for someone. But if you want something more, or even just to explore what could be possible, then, look at your triggers, look at, how much your thinking is on the negative side, and then learn a little bit more about the subconscious and how our brain is really plastic. And there's, when I first started talking about this and learning about it, I kept saying, oh, this is new information. It's not.
No,
We've had this information for a long, long time. And there's evidence in history that they had information about the subconscious that was, palpable. And, it may not be that it wasn't published in studies and all of that until our lifetime, but at least we know that it's a thing. It is a real thing, and that consciousness goes beyond the individual, all of these law of attraction and, concepts of the oneness of all of it. I believe we're getting closer to that, and that sometimes in the process of getting closer to that, the old things have to break down for people to start to say, wait a minute, there's a new way to be. Because this old way, it's kind of
we're seeing it across
apart.
the board. I mean, you mentioned, societal factors, politics and, the entertainment industry and, how society is organized online and all. I mean, all of those are indications and collections of evidence of foundations that are crumbling right in front of our eyes. We see it every day. We often react poorly to it, understandably. We get frustrated by it. We get angry at it and so forth. But nevertheless, it's happening, and it's happening right now. And and I think it is directly tied into what you were just talking about. It's tied into that greater self-awareness, that greater awareness of the conscious mind and the role of the subconscious mind. As more and more people become aware of that, I think that's where the crumbling starts to happen. They just don't realize, they don't connect the two. They don't say, oh, my focus on this over here is directly connected to this thing over there. We don't see it that way. But that is what it is. That connection is what's driving the whole thing. And it's leading people to basically choose different things from what they chose before. They don't necessarily know it. They aren't necessarily doing it consciously, right? But they are making different choices. And those different choices are playing out for good or for evil, depending on which way they're doing it, but they're playing out differently.
Exactly. And I do think the biggest shift for me in learning all of this was how much I was stuck in what didn't work. Making a choice like that to leave a 20-year career, albeit I was very fortunate to have an early retirement option, but not everybody has that. So, what do you do if it, like even a lot of women that I meet, they've been divorced or widowed. And so they now are facing that they're not doing this alone. And so taking a risk to be an entrepreneur or taking a risk to do a different career is quite a big risk. Many people are not set up financially the way that, things were so easily done in the past. When you stayed at one company or you stayed in one profession, you had a decent retirement. Now it's like,
well, it's not just whether you're set up financially, it's also whether you're set up emotionally.
True. Absolutely.
That's actually, now this is my viewpoint, but I think from my 20 plus years as an entrepreneur, the hardest part is dealing with the emotional side. The intellectual side, I was able to do real well. The reason I crashed is because I didn't handle the emotional side well. It wasn't until I started looking at that and exploring it and feeling like, oh my God, that's really playing a role here. And that's a big role. And oh, this is even bigger than I thought. That's when I finally started to make the breakthroughs. But until that part, you're going to be continually just stuck in the mud. And that to me is the biggest, toughest, most challenging lesson you have to learn if you're going to become an entrepreneur. And I think it's also a main reason why people don't want to be entrepreneurs. There are a lot of people who are afraid of it. And I think that they don't necessarily know why they're afraid of it, but that's really the root of it. They're afraid of the emotional connection to it.
Yes. And also it can bring up all of those things that are unresolved, all those emotional things that are unresolved of not feeling worthy, of not feeling, of just being so overly concerned of how you're going to be seen, right? Part of what people often, struggle with, especially what I see with women my age and, getting into doing this work is like, oh, I have to get on camera. oh, I have to be camera ready. I have, it's like I'm not going to look like I used to look and all of this stuff. And so it becomes a real barrier. But I feel like women, when they end up single, or whether it's through divorce or death or, choice, they have that added thing. So if they haven't done the emotional work, they have that. Then they have this financial situation where it's like, no, I can't really afford to invest in a business and invest time in a business and not be earning a salary. So it puts like another layer on top of it. And I know for a fact that, many will just say, yeah, I mean, maybe down the line I might do that. Or they have got to the point where they just don't have the confidence for that. And, then let's work on the emotional stuff. Let's work on the emotional stuff so you can experience more joy with what you do have. Because, we talk about gratitude and all that. And I do believe that it's good to appreciate what you have. But if you are constantly trying to reach and grab for, what if you're one of these people that's been isolated? You don't have a pet. You don't have a partner. Your family is all far away. You don't have a lot right there. You have a warm bed. That's wonderful. But you start to feel like and this is what I see with clients, is like you're focusing more on what's missing. And that that's not going to catapult you into more. And so that's why, like you said, the emotions are the key piece. If we can help you rise up on that emotional scale, then we can get you to start to make space for some other thoughts than just what has been. Because staying stuck in what's been is not going to move you forward, obviously.
So this small group coaching thing that you've been doing, I think you call it Soul Alignment Collective. Interesting
yes.
name. But if somebody wants to find out about that, how do they find out more about what you're doing there, and how do they reach out to you?
So my company is called Rock Your Blocks, and it really is just about removing the blocks to your happiness, to your experience less emotional pain and having more joy in your life. And so if you go to that website, rockyourblocks.com, you'll find information there. You can sign up for my newsletter, or you can sign up to find out more about this small group coaching course, which is really designed for women that are in that transitional phase of life and just find themselves emotionally, struggling financially, or a combination of these things. And they're really trying to get out of that negative mindset. So it's really about learning how to use subconscious healing to change your life. And I help them to curate their own practices that are going to help them calm, soothe, because not everybody can sit and om and get into a state, right?
I've never been able to on my way into a state. That just puts me to sleep. That's all it does.
Yes. And a lot of people have told me that. And I'm like, there's different strategies. Sometimes people find that they like to journal, or breath work. And that's, so I try to give a sampling of that so that people can have a way to just calm their nervous system. Because let's face it, we need that these days. Vital. Yeah. So I incorporate that into it. And then we do a little bit of conscious work to help bring up, some of the things like limiting beliefs, emotional pain memories that may again, may not even be a real thing that happened, but it was a thing that we felt. And so if we don't bring them up a little bit and work on them, then they're not going to lessen. And then we actually learn how to create, little statements like, stopping a negative thought pattern and what can you put in its place. And by doing that, you have tools now going forward. And over time, you start to really befriend your subconscious mind, and you can start to laugh at it a little bit and make a joke out of it instead of just going down a negative spiral. So that's kind of the heart of it. And it's a 4-month program. It's a weekly session live with me. And it's really designed to just provide that inspiration, that community, and learning a way to be that is just allowing more happiness and less pain in your life, less emotional pain. So,
well, thank you very much for coming onto the program and telling us about what you're doing and how you got there. And it's obviously been quite the journey, one that you're continuing to enjoy. I mean, just from the way I'm looking at your face right now as we're talking, you got this big smile on your face. So yes, she's on the right path for her. This is the one she wants to be on. It's a good one. But seriously, thank you for taking the time to join us. We appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Walt. It's been a pleasure.
And we'll see you all next time here on LOA Today. Goodbye, everybody.